Tuesday, July 19, 2022, Urbandale Lunch and Learn meeting to order, and ask Nicole to take roll call, please.
Carberry Montgomery.
Here.
McBurney.
Here.
Obrecht.
Here.
And Kroll and Blake are absent.
Thank you. And then a motion and a second to approve the agenda.
Motion to approve, Obrecht. Second, McBurney.
Motion by Obrecht, second by McBurney. Any further discussion? If not, roll call, please.
Obrecht.
Yes.
McBurney.
Yes.
Carberry Montgomery.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. And then item 3.1 would be to review the draft ordinance on urban chickens. First, who's going to start us here?
We'll go right to Steve on this. Sent out the draft ordinance yesterday. Hopefully you've had a chance to review it. And Steve, this would be an opportunity for you to give a short tour of the ordinance that was drafted, and we can take any questions.
Be happy to do that. Let me share my screen. I'll put it up here just so we can kind of go through it real quick. Share. Okay, hopefully everybody is seeing that all right. So this is not the last time you'll see this, obviously. I took the comments that you had from our last Lunch and Learn, incorporated them into this. This is just a draft of what an ordinance could look like. I'll take your comments from today, and what I would propose is that we then come back, take this through P&Z like we did with bees. We would have a public hearing at P&Z on August 15, and then we would bring it to council for a public hearing on September 6th. And so if there's issues with any of those dates, let me know, but that's certainly what I would suggest at this point. P&Z public hearing on August 15. Council public hearing on September 6th. And if there's, major comments and we need to retweak some things, we certainly can. But this has been modeled very heavily off the Waukee ordinance. It seems to be something that is working for them. Talked to their code enforcement officer. I think I mentioned last time they have about 12 people that are signed up that they're aware of. There's probably a couple that they don't know of, obviously, but they do require an annual permit, which is how I've got this set up. So every year they need to renew it. Their fee is $25. And then so when there's a new permit or a renewal, their code enforcement officer just goes out, does a quick inspection, make sure that there's water, food, and shelter that's provided in conjunction with this chapter, and moves on. So it's what seems to be a fairly straightforward thing that seems to be working okay for them. So just real quick to run through this, and then we can talk about any questions or additional things that you want to talk about. So again, this is set up very similar to the Waukee ordinance. It does require a permit. It mentions in here that a permit is good for 1 year. It says that all fees, fines, liens, anything else that people owes the city needs to be paid before we will consider that permit. Mentions then that issuance of the permit, once we have everything we need, would then be issued by the code enforcement officer, and that they're good for 1 year. There's a section in here that talks about conditions by which we could deny, suspend, or revoke or not renew a permit. And those are fairly obvious things that you might think would be in there, just essentially failure to comply with any part of this section. And then there is a section in here about notifying them if we're not going to issue a permit or revoke a permit. And then there's an appeals section. I did have the city attorney look at this, and the only recommendation from Bob at this point is to change this paragraph 8, this appeals section, to have the appeal go to the city council. That would make it consistent with a couple of other chapters in our code, such that people could appeal this directly to the city council. The city council could then make their decision, and then people, of course, can take it to district court if they want to take it another step further. So that was his recommendation on this chapter 8, that I would change the language that the appeal would go directly to the city council. In terms of number and types of chickens, we had discussed this, that it would be no more than 2 that would be allowed on a property. This is one we talked a little bit about last time. I have written this now so that a permit could be granted on any residentially zoned property where there is a single family home that is owner occupied. So if you've got questions or more discussion about that, we can certainly talk about that, but that's the way I've written it now. Any residential area with a single family home that is owner occupied, we could issue a permit for up to 2 chickens on that property. A no commercial use, just a little line in here about they can't engage in breeding or fertilizer production or anything like that. Then we did get into a section for enclosures, in terms of, chickens need to be kept in an enclosure, or a excuse me, or a fenced area at all times, and they definitely need to be secured within a hen house during non-daylight hours. So that's one thing I wanted to make sure that you saw. And then the other section I wanted to make sure that you saw was just in terms of the materials of a hen house. There's a section here that they need to be provided, that they need to be enclosed on all sides, and this is directly out of Waukees language. So if there's anything here you would want to change, let me know. But it basically just says that it can't look like a dump. Basically, it needs to be a halfway looking chicken hen house. And specifically, there's language in here that says the use of scrap, wasteboard, sheet metal, or other materials is prohibited, and they need to be well maintained. So that's certainly something you'd want to take a look at, and let me know if you'd want to make any changes there. And then just a few general sections in terms of odor and noise that we really don't want any of that. Don't want to be able to hear them beyond your property. Having only 2 will certainly help with that. Making sure they keep things clean, and then if we notice that there are parasites and rodents and other things, we can direct them to get rid of the chickens. They need to have feed and water at all times. Waste needs to be stored properly and or removed. And then there's a couple of sections here at the end in terms of unlawful acts and nuisances to be able to abate the situation if we got to that point. So that's it in a nutshell. What questions or further discussion do you guys have? I guess the main thing I would need to know is if those dates sound all right, and then what you guys are thinking in terms of a fee for the annual permit. And like I said, Waukee currently has $25 as their permit. I guess I would recommend $30. We have a couple of things where that's kind of our lowest priced permit, and that would be either for a fence or for a temporary use permit. If a retailer wants to have essentially a sidewalk sale, they get a temporary use permit to be able to sell those retail goods outside. That's also a $30 permit. So I would recommend 30 just to be consistent, but happy to entertain whatever you guys are thinking.
I have no opposition to the 30. Do have a question on the appeals piece.
Yep.
Is that based on the date that they send the request, however they choose to send it, as opposed to the date that we respond?
Yep. Right now,
Okay.
the way it's written is that we can, that we can be denied or suspended or anything. And I think, let's see, where is it? I think there was, here you go. They could appeal it. Basically, what Bob was recommending is we set it up such that we would notify them, and that within 10 business days of their receipt of our notice, they could apply to have city council hear it.
Okay.
I had a couple sets of questions since I wasn't in the first part of this. Define commercial. So if they end up giving or selling a couple dozen eggs away a year, is that not a good? I guess.
Yeah. So Waukees code doesn't cover that. And I think really, generally speaking, if they're selling it to a neighbor or a friend or whoever, we're not going to know about it. If they have a sign in their yard that says fresh eggs for sale, we're going to see that, and we're going to say, yep, no, that's not something you can advertise. If you want to sell to folks, that's fine. What Waukee did is just covered it in terms of the chicken breeding or the fertilizer production. They didn't really address selling of eggs at all. And I'm not sure that we need to, unless we would find that becomes a problem. But part of that is, if you're going to have 2 chickens, they lay 1 or 2 eggs a day. If you do the math, you're not talking about that many eggs, depending on what a family's diet might be too. So
It's more that, hey, we're on vacation, our neighbor's going to take the eggs for a price.
yeah.
Those kind of things.
Yep.
And then the other is define a fence. How tall does a fence need to be?
The pen at this point, most places, and the code enforcement officer at Waukee and I talked about this just a little bit. It's generally just like a 4 to 5 foot high fence that's an area within their backyard that they can just kind of let the chickens out of the hen house and roam around for a while before they stick them back in the hen house. While Key specifically did not address that, we certainly can if you want to, but I did not put anything in there just to,
Yeah,
you know.
I think we need to define it a little bit, minimum height or, there's gotta be some sort of language out there to help define what a fence is.
Okay. There are some setbacks in play here with the, let me go back down to the section on the hen houses. We did get into a little bit of it here in terms of the coop, the hen house itself has to be 10 feet away from a property line, 25 feet away from any residential principal structure, and we can certainly add something into this section that would address fencing.
I mean, you can buy, 12-inch chicken wire, and I
Yeah.
wouldn't want somebody to think that that's appropriate, so.
Yep.
And then on the zoning piece, did any of these zonings cover detached townhomes, anything that way?
Some of the zonings do when you get into the R2, R3, and R4, and that's why we distinguished in a couple of other sections that it would only be single-family homes that are owner-occupied.
Right, I guess I'm thinking, what Hubble's building over by the fuel station, some of those are villas, so single-family home.
Yeah.
Kind of high density though.
Yep.
Would those be allowed?
You certainly could extend it to townhomes and just say not in multifamily. And I would say the majority of the townhomes in Urbandale are owner occupied. I mean, there's certainly some that are rentals, but I would not see a problem extending it to townhomes as well.
Okay. I guess that's more going the other way. If those, those villas, you've got shared maintenance and so forth. And I guess can HOAs say not to allow these? So can an HOA rule these out?
Yep, they could. I was just going to say, I think the reality of this is that in a lot of the newer neighborhoods out west, their covenants are going to outlaw this anyway.
And also with the zoning, I'm guessing all these zonings have at least a little bit of yard. So there isn't any way that somebody could be putting this on a deck somewhere.
Correct. Yeah, that's the advantage of keeping it to the single family home and not the multifamily. Yep.
And then the last one's on process a little bit. So this is running through community development versus the pet license process. Help me understand why all animals aren't under pet license process versus under the community development.
Again, mostly just because we're modeling this after Waukee, and this is how Waukee has set it up. I don't think it's going to necessarily be a real big burden on our staff, just because I don't think we're going to have that many of these. If Waukee has 12, I don't know, do the math. How many is it going to be? But that and the fact that we're setting it up such that you do have to get a permit every year. There is an inspection, so if there's problems, we can identify what those problems are and make them become compliant. That's certainly something. We could set it up differently if you like. I just was modeling this after Waukee. That's the way they did it, and I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal for our department to administer.
Okay. Well, if you have chickens, you probably have other pets. And so if you're going one area for a pet license, be able to add on chickens to that pet license. And I get that it triggers an inspection. So I just didn't know if that process would be easier for residents to follow versus two separate processes if you own multiple animals.
Yeah, I think that was probably Waukee's thinking, and that's my thinking as well, is if you keep it all in one department so that we can take care of the permit and the inspection, that just kind of streamlines it for the resident.
Yeah, those are basically my questions.
So just to clarify on the fence issue, so the way it's written right now, the chickens either have to be within a hen house or in a fenced area in their backyard. In the way it's written right here in this paragraph B, it's talking about how small some of the openings can be in the hen house itself. You want to clarify for them if they're in the yard that they need to be within a fenced area and maybe dictate what type of fence that needs to be other than some chicken wire? Is that what I was hearing?
Yeah. Because what is a fence, I think, is a question that's going to come back.
Right.
So does my existing fencing of my backyard work, or is this separate fencing? Is there a minimum height the fencing needs to be? That's the part I think we probably need to have a minimum fencing so you just don't go by the 1 foot roll of chicken wire and put in a couple stakes and call it fencing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll propose some language on that.
Yeah, so as far as materials of the fencing and that, I'd, leave it up to you. It's just more, I could see
Right.
this as an area of question. If somebody's reading the ordinance and say, oh, I can go get chickens, I'm gonna go build something and ask permission.
Here's the scenario I could see happening. So they have a yard, they already have, say, a 4-foot chain link fence or even a privacy fence, whatever, some sort of a fence surrounding the perimeter of the yard, but they want to fence an area 10 by 10 outside of the hen house so that the chickens can be outside of the hen house and be in the backyard. They just need to be within a fence, but not roaming around the entire backyard. That's what I think would be the most common scenario. If that's the common scenario, do we want to let, can that be allowed to be just some chicken wire? Or do we want another, at least some sort of a chain link fence to enclose wherever the chickens are going to be? I guess that's probably the way to phrase it.
Yeah, just clarifying so that there isn't any questions.
Okay.
For me personally, as long as they're not getting into their neighbor's backyard, that's my primary concern.
Or the neighbor's dogs getting them, right?
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing I'm worried about.
Okay.
All right,
Any other questions or comments?
comments? Bridget, anything further from you?
Go chickens.
Okay. Does the timetable go into P&Z public hearing August 15 and then back to council to formally consider an ordinance on September 6th? Does that work for everybody? As far
I
as
think
we
that
know?
sounds feasible, yeah.
Okay. That's what I will shoot for, and we'll go from there.
All right, thank you, Steve. We'll move forward on that. Item 3.2 then is the 2022 construction update.
And this goes over to Christian Brostrom in engineering.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm gonna share my screen, hopefully. There we go. Can all see the presentation? So this is our 2022 construction update. Last year when we gave this update, we actually gave it a little late. We ended up doing it in September, which was lovely because we could show you a lot of finished projects at that time. We are, of course, in the height of construction season, and unfortunately, I do not have the quantity of finished projects to show you today, but we'll show you where we're at on the items we've got going. So we're going to start with actually our project from last year on Waterford Road reconstruction from 142nd to 156. This is substantially complete. They need to do the restoration. They completed the sidewalks and the grading after the seating window, so they will need to come back to the fall to do final seating for all areas on the east half of the project. This was our first street designed using our Complete Streets guidelines with the sidewalks on both sides and a HMA separated bike lane on the north side. The total project was $4.5 million. This is a view of the HMA trail after it's gone in with the paint markings in. You can see the current recommendation is the green crosswalk bars at the side road crossings. These facilities are somewhat new. We do have standard guidelines. We use the MUTCD and other guidelines so that we can standardize these with other communities. These are a little bit less specific of applications than maybe some of our other roadways that we've been using for years, just because these are relatively newer facilities. So we'll definitely keep an eye on these paint markings over the next few years and see how they hold up and if they work for us. And then Ryan took a bunch of these shots from the drone. We appreciate him doing that. He got this shot of the overhead. I thought this was kind of nice to be able to see what that template looks like in the field for our Complete Streets guidelines. So again, you can see that 5-foot sidewalk on both sides and the 10-foot HMA trail. The trail will fade a little bit when it's newly placed. Of course, it's pretty stark contrast to the pavement. The pavement gets a little bit darker and the HMA gets a little lighter, and there's not quite such a drastic contrast after a couple of years. This facility is 65-foot back to back from the outside edges of the through lanes. So there is room to fit this in our standard 120-foot right-of-way. For 170th Street, which we'll be talking about next, when we have an 80-foot back-to-back on the paving, that starts to get a little tight. We don't get a lot of room left between the back of curb and the sidewalk or the trail on the other side. So we are starting to ask for a 5-foot pedestrian easement along those facilities so that we can just move things out just a little bit, give a little more room for snow storage and a buffer between the drivers and the pedestrian users. And I should mention, feel free to jump in with questions at any time. Of course, we can do questions at the end too, but feel free to ask if you see something. Next project that's ended up being a 2-year project is the Douglas urbanization.
Kristen, can I
Yeah.
jump in on the Waterford?
Sure.
Who's there? I know you said they're gonna do the seeding later. Who's responsible for maintaining the weeds in the interim?
They are responsible. We have had a bit of a challenge with the subcontractor for the weeds out there. We have had a number of conversations with the prime about getting those addressed, getting on top of it. They did come through and mow them a few weeks ago. I think they need to be back again, and we'll keep following up with them.
I am on this road almost daily,
Sure.
and I understand it's not seeded, but with the dryness that we've had and then rain, and doesn't look good.
Yeah, no, and I agree. And yeah, we had a couple of very strongly worded conversations with the contractor a couple of weeks ago because they are, and of course the sub works for the prime, so we are trying to go through the prime, but we do not feel they're fulfilling their end of the bargain here. So
Well, I'll be keeping everybody honest on this. So thank you. It looks great, though. I mean, I just can't wait to see it with grass and.
Yeah, well, and certainly from the minute we had pavement down, we've seen a lot of users on the sidewalk and the trail out there. So I think it'll be a popular facility. Okay, Douglas urbanization. This is our second designed complete streets project. Same thing, we're keeping that same model for these large arterials. Just a refresher from last year, we did add a lot of curb and gutter out there. We milled and overlaid the westbound lanes. The eastbound lanes were concrete, and so we just patched those. The big holdup last year, if you recall, was the board storm sewer. We had utilities in the way, which delayed the boring. The boring also took longer than the contractor originally estimated, so that certainly delayed progress out there. And we are replacing the signal at Maryland. There was one there before. We're replacing the mast arms, and the total cost of this project is $5.4 million. We got some updated drone photos. They actually just paved the HMA separated bike lane on the north side end of last week, last Thursday and Friday. So these are some shots of that. This one, the contractor actually seeded the median. They did seed it a little late. They seeded it after the seeding window, but we had some decent weather in June, and that median is starting to green up. They will need to come back and do a reseeding, of course, in the fall just to make sure that proper turf grass takes. They haven't done the pavement markings yet on the trail here, but of course they'll come back and do those as well. So things are wrapping up. They've got a few more sidewalks that they need to get done. The ramp connections at the side roads for the trail they are working on. And then the finished grading to backfill adjacent to the trail. So they'll get those wrapped up, and then they will move out of the way, and the plantings contractor will move in. Here's a view from the other end, facing east. The subcontractor for the signals was actually out there today and cutting the new loops in for the 100th Street intersection. And then I do have, so our inspector, Michael Johnson, took some video of them pouring the trail last week. I'm not going to play the whole trail, whole video, but you can see that they've got the trail paver out there. They back the asphalt truck up to the paver to dump the material. And then as they start to move, and this is I think this is the base course that went in a little while back. You can see that they're paving behind it. So it's kind of a fun operation to watch. Well, I find it fun anyway out there if you can catch it. So it's kind of a neat progress. Definitely one of those things that it's hard to tell sometimes when grading is happening or when seeding is happening, you can definitely see the progress that's made when someone's out there laying pavement. So, okay. And then the big project, 170th Street and Meredith Drive reconstruction. This is our third project using that Complete Streets template. We've got 43,000 square yards of 8.5-inch pavement. This is, of course, is the full mile from Meredith to Waterford on 170th Street. It's also the last about quarter mile at the west end of Meredith Drive. We've got 7,500 square yards of PCC sidewalk and trail. Meredith, of course, was not designed under the current Complete Streets policy because that was done several years ago. So there's a 10-foot PCC trail on the north side of Meredith, tie into the existing facility out there. And then on 170th Street will be our HMA separated bike lane. A lot of storm sewer out there. The new traffic signal at Meredith Drive, we know, is a big item for a lot of residents out there. Very excited about that. And the cost of this project is $13.95 million. I've got a kind of a sketch of this first year, the goal for the first year. The north is to the right, so we're looking west down Meredith. The Meredith Drive portion was closed about a month ago, a little over a month ago, to start grading and work in storm sewer work in there. They've also done, I don't know if you can see my mouse, up at the north end on the east side of 170th, they need to get the 20-inch water main in up here so that the water main loop was fed around, and then they could close down the water main at Meredith to do some replacements there. So they did get that 20-inch in and tested it a week or so ago. One of the other things they ended up doing is up here on the north end, there's a new subdivision going in on the west side, Bentley Ridge with Accurate Development. They need to hook up to 170th. They'll probably be doing a lot of their infrastructure this year, whereas we're not getting there until next year with our project. So a couple of weeks ago, the contractor did run some storm sewer across and the water main across to Bentley Ridge so that they are able to hook up and keep going. They'll still need to put some temporary pavement in, which is typical for these subdivisions attaching to arterials that are being rebuilt. But that will really help them get their storm and their water main going. And then we recently closed the intersection. This intersection at Meredith 170 is being lowered by about 4 feet. So there's a lot of grading to do there, a lot of work to do there. Really no way to keep that open during construction. So they've closed that. We're waiting for Waukee Gas to relocate, as well as Mid-American Gas has a section they need to relocate. I think there's some other utilities also in the way there. And then they'll start mass grading that as well. Right now, it's only closed up to about Sharon. The goal for this year was to reconstruct all the way to Hickory. So as we make progress here, hopefully they can close a little bit more here and get a little more done. The key, of course, is we don't want the road right in front of the school closed during the school year. So right now, in the fall, the school will need to go north for access. In the spring, they'll start at the north end so the school can drive south, and then they have to do the portion in front of the school while school is out for next summer. So it does create some staging restrictions for the contractor. Okay, so they have graded on Meredith. They're working on that in the last couple of weeks. I think they'll be able to start making a lot of progress on that once they get some of these utilities moved and the remaining water main work done. And then this is that crossing over to Bentley Ridge that I mentioned. So the picture is not squished. That is an arch pipe. We don't use arch pipes a whole lot because they do tend to be a little more expensive, but they typically come into play when we've got clearance issues, when we need the flow line of the pipe to be higher, but we need to have that cover over it for the roadway. So this one did end up being an arch pipe to make sure we got the capacity we needed for that. And they got that cross run across so that Bentley Ridge can drain across the roadway. The existing roadway culvert's essentially exactly in the middle of the future intersection connection to 170th Street. So obviously that needed to come out in order for that street to go in. And then this is a 20-inch water main installation along 170th. It is a big pipe. And then this is kind of the fun part is you definitely, when you're working ahead of the grading, you certainly see some unusual things such as hydrants sticking well up into the air because the grading hasn't been done yet. So obviously that'll all be reconciled to the proper grade when we get up there with the grading and paving. Okay, Aurora Avenue, 104th Street, 100th Street, the run from Northwest Urbandale Drive up to Plum. That's also a big project this year. We've got 15,600 square yards of pavement on that. As part of the Complete Streets master plan for this roadway, it recommended a 10-foot trail on the east side. We were able to fit that in. There were some constraints with power poles and with the retaining wall, but we were able to make that happen. So that will be going in as the roadway is reconstructed. We don't have a lot of storm sewer on this because we were able to reuse a lot of the existing storm sewer. We did need to replace intakes in order to get those to tie in with the new back of curb and just the new alignment. This project is $2.65 million. So we are trying to do this in 4 phases in order to keep access to the subdivisions. The intersections, such as the intersections to the UGRA and the intersection at 103rd Street, those will need to be done half and half in order to make sure that we can still get residents in and out. They started with phase 1. They have done the paving in phase 1. I've got a photo of that in a minute. They're working on getting sidewalks in so we can get that completely reopened. They're working on phase 4. There was a gas conflict up there. We have talked with the contractor and impressing upon them the need that that really needs to get going. It's taking longer than, frankly, it should have. So we are working with them to keep that moving. So as you may recall, May ended up being a very wet month. They were able to get part of the intersection poured, and then we had a lot of rain, and it delayed it again. So unfortunately, that did hamper a lot of our projects. But they were wanting to get this portion done so that they could reopen that outside lane of Meredith. They weren't working directly next to traffic. And then this is a few weeks ago, they were paving stage 1, the paver's set up and ready to go. And then we have a drone photo of that being completed. And they were able to get the side driveways back in. I think the last one was poured last week. And they are working, as I said, right now in stage 1 doing sidewalks and trail. Okay. 128th Street reconstruction. So on 128th Street between Douglas and Aurora, we had some joints which were having significant issues and general pavement failures, particularly in the northbound lanes. So this project was to replace the northbound lanes from Douglas to Aurora. The same issues were really just in about the south 700 feet of the southbound lanes. So we're replacing that portion, and then while we're there, doing some patching as well for the remaining southbound lanes. It's about 12,600 square yards of pavement. One of the stipulations for this was that the roadway did need to be reopened before school starts, which is really not that bad for a situation like this. It's what, a half mile of road, but for just a remove and replace, that can be done fairly quickly. We did have a bit of a holdup. The contractor was concerned that the fiber optic line was in the way, so they did some additional potholing and verifications. Turns out it was not in the way, so that was a good plus, but it did take them a little time just to verify that before they continued their work. Cost of this project is $1.48 million. And then this is a location, again, north is to your right, between Douglas and Aurora. This road is completely closed right now, which certainly helps speed the construction project along. Obviously, this is a bit of a runaround for some of the residents, but there are good connections down to Douglas. Aurora has a good connection west to 142nd, so there are definitely some alternate routes for residents to take, and we do have the detour posted. And then these photos are from yesterday. They were setting up the paver. They prepped the subgrade. Those rebar and metal baskets, those are the rebar for the CD joints between each panel. They actually run transverse against across the roadway, so they set those up this morning before they started paving. And then they have been paving today, which is very exciting. I think we've got, let me see if I can pull it over here real quick. So this is from our traffic camera. They were able to do the portion north of Douglas. They're actually up around the corner right now, but they're not quite far enough to get a good view from the other direction, from the other traffic camera. So they've made good progress today. I think given the heat, they're not going to make it all the way to Aurora today, but they will finish that up tomorrow. And then they need to come back. They're going to do some of the turn lanes and the side road connections before they rip out the southbound traffic and do the same, or southbound pavement. The southbound pavement reconstruction is about the area that you can see here. It stops about where the camera view stops at the north end, and then the rest will be patching. Okay.
So Kristen, you said that we're
Yep.
not tearing out the southbound lane. We're only going for that one section from
Yeah.
Douglas to.
Yep. And actually, if you look at it in the aerial, you can even see where the pavement changes. That south end of 128 even looks different from an aerial view than the north end does. The north end is in better condition and does not need a total replacement.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, and then our annual patch program. The last few years we've been doing 2 phases on this just to break up the project to be a little bit more manageable for contractors. This year, both of our projects were about the same size. Typically, one's about half again as big as the other one. This year we had a lot of patching to do and we had the funds to do it, so they're about the same size. So Western Urbandale has a little over 17,000 square yards of patch. Eastern Urbandale has about 16,000 square yards. We do include adjacent ADA ramps as we go through there. And the total cost of both projects is $2.7 million. This is a picture of the West project, phase 1. The contractor actually just started this last week, so they got a bit of a late start. However, they do seem to move very quickly, and part of the reason they had a late start was that they were doing similar projects in 2 other communities, which they completed very quickly. So we'll definitely keep an eye on them over the next few weeks. This is definitely later than patch projects usually start, but I'm still optimistic they should be able to finish in time given the rate they're going. And then this is Eastern Urbandale. I actually forgot to update this screenshot. They've actually made it most of the way up this street now, and then they're coming back the other way. And we also had a little bit of a commercial area on the west there. We had a cul-de-sac that was literally falling apart. Sometimes these cul-de-sacs are kind of hard to catch on our pavement condition report just because the van that drives the street to get pavement condition has to be at a certain speed in order to get the analysis it needs to give the pavement a rating. So areas like that we just identify from field review or from resident concerns and add those, and that cul-de-sac definitely needed to be done. So nice to see that one was completed. And they're in good pace to complete the project this year. Okay. Coyote Ridge Trail. So last year we did phase 1 of the trail. This year, of course, we're doing phase 2 to complete that connection down to Waterford Road, about 1,800 square yards of paving. The Parks Department also needed a sidewalk to the playground in Parkland at Coyote Ridge Trail, and so they got a quote from our contractor. They contacted a few other people and had trouble getting a response. Our contractor was willing to do it, so they kind of piggybacked on this project, which I think works out really well. We will talk about a few more trail projects later on. Thankfully, we did get very good bids for our trail projects this year. They came in right about at the estimates, so that was nice. This one's a little under $200,000 for both the trail and the playground. So just to refresh, the part in blue was the part that was constructed last year. The portion to the east was done with the developments, so that connects out, well, it connects all the way to 142nd, although there's not a trail on 142nd yet. And then the red portion will run down to Waterford Road. Obviously, this is an older aerial with the 2-lane Waterford Road. Of course, that's been reconstructed and ties into the bike lane there. The playground for parks is right about here in the middle of the Coyote Ridge Park, and they're pouring like the perimeter sidewalk for that playground. And they just poured this mostly last week. So this is phase 1, looking to the northeast, and then kind of doing a 180 and looking back to the west and the east. This is the new trail that went in that connects down to Waterford Road. You can see phase 1 over on the right and then Waterford Road on the left. This street here, 153rd Street, it will eventually punch through. They will pave this through. This is connected, but eventually this will punch through and then, of course, connect to the sidewalks going up to the development to the north. And then this is that view of the existing trail going to the east, and you can see where that playground is in the middle of Coyote Ridge. Okay, community entrance signs. So we've had this project for multiple years doing phasing on the entrance signs. This year with the 2022 project, which is under design, we've got 3 locations: Northwest Urbandale Drive, just south of the Interchange, and then coming into town on 128th Street and 100th Street. Next year will be coming into town on 86th Street at the Interchange, and then coming into town northbound on 104th Street. And this round, we still include the lighting. All the signs are lit. The landscaping will be completed by Parks. We have discovered that the contractors that are doing the signage are not necessarily landscape oriented, and it just seems simpler and will have a better product if Parks handles the landscaping separately from the signage contract. And then together, both of these projects are estimated at $750,000. So I guess just to review the signs that we've got already, these are, the two on the left are at 100th Street, the one on the right is at 156. The signs we're proposing for 100th Street and 128th Street will be similar to the one on the right. It'll be a smaller pedestal. But I think they look really nice, and they look very nice lit up as well. The ones we put in last year were at the Meredith Interchange and 100th Street. I tried to grab some screenshots off the cameras at night because I think they look really nice lit up. I don't think the screenshots do them justice, so you'll just want to try to remember to drive past them at the evening, but I think they do look really nice.
Quick question, Chris, on that. One at Meredith seems really close. The sign edge compared to the curb seems really close.
It is close, yeah.
Okay.
And
has anybody hit it yet?
No, as far as I know, no one has hit it yet, and they would. Frankly, that concerned me a little bit too, but it is behind the curb. They'd have to jump the curb to hit it, so I certainly hope that doesn't happen. And whenever we can, we like to provide a little bit more buffer. Sometimes there's limitations on where things can go, but
I obviously hope future ones are a little bit further back. So
I hope so too. Yep. So the ones proposed for this year, one is at Northwest Urbandale Drive coming into town. There is a sign there. It uses our old logo and branding. So, and this is just a mock-up kind of what it might look like. We should be getting the next submittal here in a few weeks. They've completed the survey, so we'll have the next look. But this was their mock-up of what that one might look like. And then, as mentioned, the ones at 100th Street, 128th will be the smaller pedestals that you can see as you come around the corner. We often get a lot of questions about properties that are just outside Urbandale city limits because people aren't exactly sure where our boundary is. So I do think that this helps them kind of know where Urbandale starts. Okay, Parks and Public Works Facility. We have built a new Parks and Public Works maintenance facility. It is in operation. I think it's been a great plus for the staff in that office. As part of this project, they were also renovating the existing Public Works fleet storage for cold storage. The total cost of the project is $22.7 million. Just a recap of where we've been and where we're going. In 2019, the old lumber liquidators building on that site was taken down. In 2021, this is some photos from last year. The new building's up. You can see our detention basin on the left. The existing salt storage building at the rear, at the top of the picture, was kept. And then to the right was the admin buildings and the old fleet storage building. Those, the admin buildings were the ones that were set to be demoed. And then this is the building in use. Nice to have cars in the parking lot. And then the admin building gets demoed, this fleet storage gets reskinned so that you can drive through from north to south instead of from side to side. And that has been mostly done. They're still working on some electrical items in there. And obviously the admin buildings and the parking lot have been removed. Once that gets set, they'll repave things and install the wall along the eastern property boundary. And we've got an almost full house, so it's nice to see all the vehicles inside the storage. One of the projects that we have ongoing is bank stabilizations. As we identify needs and can get those designed, we do those projects. Beaver Creek was a little bit bigger than what we've done in the past, so we did go out to consultants design for this. They included over 1,000 tons of riprap, and kind of the default mode on a lot of these is simply to armor the bank, which is perhaps effective but not always efficient or the best solution. So one of the things the consultant proposed here was what's called longitudinal peak stone toe protection. And I'll admit I have a terrible time remembering that acronym. I know all the words, but I can't remember what order they go in. But the idea is that you put a row of stone along the bottom of the bank, and then it sort of self-levels as the water rises and falls to anchor the bottom of the bank. And then you include some stone tiebacks, which serve as to slow down the water. It lets it deposit silt behind it and kind of fill it in. So it helps to have a more natural solution, less rock and more sediment, more dirt ultimately, and hopefully be better stabilized with vegetation rather than just rock. They've done this a number of other places, so I'm excited to see how this kind of fills in over the next few years. The cost of this project was $120,000. So these are always kind of tough to get photos on because it's hard to see what's happening, but you can see the peak toe stone along there. And then you can see kind of where these tiebacks are. They are buried, so you really just see the edge of them as they go into the bank. And then this is an aerial shot. We actually had 2 locations. The bend at the south end was the longest one, and then we had another one up here. And this was primarily to protect the trail. We were getting very close to the trail as far as the erosion goes, and it was starting to become a safety issue. So I think this will help stabilize things for years to come. We currently have a project under design for North Walnut Creek. I think it'll use some of these same practices. We've got similar issues there. North of Hickman, between Hickman about halfway up to 86th Street is the current project, and looking at stabilizing some of those banks in a similar manner. And then circling back to our trail projects, so this year we had the pedestrian loop in the Walnut Creek Regional Park. We also had 3 trail replacements for the Parks Department. All of these were designed, surveyed and designed in-house. The pedestrian loop, we were able to get it exactly a half mile long, so that's kind of nice for walkers that want to figure out how far they're walking. It's exactly a half mile. The contractor on this also did Glen Eagles Park, which I'll show you in a minute. He worked very quickly, so he hasn't started this one yet, but he will work fast on this once he gets rolling on it. Glen Eagles Park, we had just over 500 linear feet of paving. This was another one where it was getting very close to the bank erosion. Well, the sidewalk wasn't. The bank erosion was getting close to it, I guess I should say. And so this helps stabilize that and repair some failing trail sections. Then we'll also be doing Sharon Heights Park this year. This contractor actually was, for fiscal reasons, was told to start after July 1st, so they're planning that for a late summer project. And then Sylvan Ridge, west of 72nd Street, they ran into some subdrain issues this spring. As mentioned, we had a very wet spring. I'm sure that's part of the reason why this trail was in somewhat poor condition is some of the subsurface drainage. So they are waiting until later in the fall when it dries out so they can really get things compacted well and get a good base for that trail.
And quick back to that trail, it doesn't look like it goes all the way down to 72nd, the paving piece.
It does. The green boundary is actually our parks boundary. So
Okay.
This is just city right away. So it's not labeled as parks. But yeah, the project goes all the way down to the bottom of the hill. Yeah.
It's not in great shape, so that's good.
Yes. Yeah. It's a good idea, or a good area to identify for repair.
Yep.
Okay. So quick summary of our major projects. As mentioned, Waterford Road and Douglas urbanization are nearly complete. Douglas plantings, of course, hasn't started yet because we need the urbanization contractor to be done and out of the way there. We did have our pre-con with them last week. They had the contract schedules a completion date for next spring. We wanted to give them time to get through a couple of seating windows, so they are ready to get going on that. 170th Street has just gotten started. Of course, that is a 2-year project, so that will take some time. And then I think we're, as mentioned, we've got a bit of a late start on the patch project, but I think we're still in good shape for getting those completed. We also marked on there the ones that were designed by city staff. And then a few other ones, I guess we hit on the trails, but of course we have our animal sidewalk program, our ADA program, traffic signal improvements. We do several programs for sanitary sewer maintenance. The looped fiber project is upcoming. We had a agreement with Metronet for installing some conduit for us, so we're waiting for them to complete that installation, and then we will proceed with installing the fiber inside that conduit. And then we have the construction at 128th Street and Hickman Road. That is a DOT project led by the DOT and is with Clive, so they are handling that administration. In addition to our public improvements, we inspect all the subdivision work that will be turned over to the city. It has been a very busy couple of years for subdivision work. These are the plats that were completed within the last year or so and were accepted by council. We also have a lot of projects currently in progress or that have CDs in the construction drawings in the pipeline ready to be approved soon. So a lot of work happening in Urbandale. A lot of locations that our inspectors need to be this year. And then looking ahead at upcoming projects, so some of the big ones that are coming up next year, we're of course working on the Merle storm sewer. Aurora Avenue west of 86th Street is not in great condition all the way up to Tanglewood. We're doing a mixture of total replacement and patching through there and working with the consultant to get that designed. We, of course, have our annual patch project. We are starting to look at the complete streets for Aurora east of 86th Street and 70th Street, looking how we can provide some on-street bike lanes through those areas. We have the Hickman Viaduct Trail. The consultant for that is working with the railroad for the permissions and the reviews needed for that, and we're hoping to continue to move forward on that one. As mentioned, we've got the community entrance signs. The next couple of phases are coming up on that. The 156th Street, we will be installing traffic signals at Meredith and at Waterford. That is currently under design with consultants. As mentioned, we also are looking at a bank stabilization project on North Walnut Creek. I'm hoping that that will be winter work, that we can let that this fall and they can do most of that construction over the winter. Our annual programs for traffic signals, ADA, those are also coming up. We'll have our sidewalk program, of course, too. Next year, the trail replacement identified was for Parkview Trail. We are planning to do that in-house. We're going to start doing some survey on that here shortly. And then, of course, we still have that 128th Street in Hickman. That's going to be a 2-year project, and the 142nd Street overlay. That one partly depends on timing with Grimes as well as development. So we'll evaluate that and see if we want to move forward on that or slide it back a little bit. And then one of the big things, of course, that we've been discussing the last few years is the stormwater study that we did a couple of years ago.
1 second, Kristen, just hop back on that one. Just the 128th and Hickman, an update on that. That's a project that's been really held up by utilities as well. So they are hoping maybe they get our trail constructed this year, but the bulk of the improvements will likely probably happen next year. So again, just a project that's been dragging out, and as you've probably noticed going through, really has not gotten started yet.
Okay, so upcoming stormwater projects, we had the consultant do the study in 2021. There were 6 subwatersheds in eastern Urbandale that they looked at for primarily for undersized storm sewer infrastructure or a lack of overland flow routes. We had the rain event in 2018, of course, which was a 500-year event. Storm sewer is not typically designed for a 500-year event, but certainly highlighted some of those drainage issues that we had in eastern Urbandale. Part of that study was to identify 10 projects kind of for first priority. Where do we start? And so we have started putting those into the CIP. Most of these involve either extensive replacement of storm sewer or new storm sewer where none existed, which also in turn requires pavement replacement in a lot of locations. So we also looked at neighborhoods that certainly needed some pavement replacement. We got a lot of neighborhoods in eastern Urbandale where the pavement is not as great as we would like. So kind of trying to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. If we're going to inconvenience the neighborhood, make sure we address both things while we're there. So we have the list of 10 projects. This was meant to be somewhat of a living document to be adjusted as we go. For example, at the time we put this list together, we had the culvert restriction at Douglas, south of Merle Mall, going into Rockland Creek. we had 6 or 7 projects upstream of that, but there's no point in doing those projects if you've got that restrictor at Douglas. And so those projects were not included in the initial list of 10. Now that we're doing that Merle Hay stormwater improvements, we can certainly look at when do we start rolling some of those upstream projects into this list. Certainly plenty of work to go around for the next couple of decades. Another thing to note is most of these projects we feel will likely be 2-year projects. We've done a couple of these in the past, such as the 72nd Street reconstruction and the 73rd Place storm sewer improvements. And these projects that take time, your neighborhoods, you don't want to close down too much at once because people have to walk, and it takes longer time. So we are kind of anticipating that most of these will be 2-year projects. So just to recap, the Merle Hay Reinvestment District storm sewer will significantly upsized the culvert underneath Douglas going down to Rockland Creek. That will open up some connections for Madison Avenue and for Airline Avenue. We definitely have some low spots in those neighborhoods that don't have great overland flow routes, and this will help provide some relief for that ultimately as those neighborhood projects move forward as well. Right now in the CIP then for 2025, we have the Roseland Drive storm sewer improvements. This includes Roseland and Palm west of 72nd Street. And then the following project we've got is farther north. It's for 65th and 66th Street and Townsend Avenue south of Meredith. We tend to start at the bottom of these storm sewer systems and start working our way back up. So for the project after that, we're doing that portion, we're flipping back to more southern Urbandale. This is just north of that first year project. So the first year project is on Roseland Drive here. This is a little bit north of that, and to pick up Oliver Smith and Monroe Court and extend the storm sewer farther north. So that's what we have currently in the plan for the next, next 4 major storm water projects. And I think that brings me to the end of my list. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right. Great update. Any questions for Kristen? All right, hearing none. Thanks, Kristen. That was good. All right, we will move on then to any other items to consider in open session right now. We do have a closed session we need to discuss, so. Not, then I'll ask for a motion in a second to enter into closed session to pursuant to Iowa Code 21.51J regarding real estate.
Motion to move to closed session, Obrecht.
Second.
Okay, motion by Obrecht, second by McBurney. Discussion. Roll call, please.
Obrecht?
Yes.
McBurney?
Yes.
Carberry Montgomery?
Yes.
And if you'll give me just a moment,
Thanks.
we'll get this set up here.
All right, thanks, Paul.